They crossed the line because nothing guarded it. The Galactic Council Armada advanced past the last marked beacon and into human space with ceremonial precision, hulls gleaming, formations immaculate. Long-range scans returned exactly what the IM charts promised. Emptiness, no border forts, no patrol lines, no warning buoys dense enough to matter. Just vacuum stretching for millions of kilometers, unclaimed and quiet. The admirals took this as confirmation, not curiosity. Human space, they concluded, was a story grown large with repetition. Threat assessments populated calmly across the command dais. 72 task groups. 10,184 hulls. Logistics margins comfortable for a 6-hour incursion. Against them, nothing registered above background noise. No active emissions. No mass shadows suggesting concealed fleets. The Council had learned to distrust silence only when it came with data. This silence came with none. Primitive borders, one admiral said, and the remark drew polite amusement. Historical briefs summarized humanity as a regional power that had chosen isolation over relevance. Their ships, when encountered at all, were described as heavy, inelegant, dependent on kinetics rather than refined energy projection. Survivors of a violent adolescence, clinging to obsolete doctrines. The border's emptiness fit the profile. A species afraid to look outward. No defenses. The phrase appeared as an annotation on a tactical overlay, flagged for later briefing. The Armada maintained cruise acceleration, crossing another 1.6 million kilometers without incident. Sensor chiefs. It widened their sweeps and found only scattered debris fields. Micrometeoroids, dead probes centuries old. Nothing broadcasting intent. One analyst noted the absence of traffic lanes and suggested human infrastructure collapse. Another suggested deliberate neglect. Both explanations satisfied the same conclusion. The Council had seen this pattern before. Quiet regions belonged to civilizations that could not afford vigilance. At the edge of the second sweep, a junior officer flagged an anomaly, faint mass readings that resolved and vanished with each pass. The data was dismissed as sensor echo. The officer did not press. No one wanted to be the first to suggest danger where the charts promised none. The Armada slowed to operational posture at 0.2C, spacing tightening into elegant arcs. Command vessels took central positions. Demonstration weapons were brought to readiness, outputs capped low to preserve salvage value. If humanity noticed the incursion, the Council intended to teach, not destroy. Processing zone confirmed. The designation propagated through the fleet without resistance. A diplomatic package queued automatically, pre-written for border violations by lesser powers. Jurisdiction asserted. Passage denied retroactively. Compliance procedures outlined with patient clarity. It had worked 1,000 times. It would work again. The admirals allowed themselves a moment of professional satisfaction. This would be recorded as a correction, not a conflict. Another myth punctured. Another quiet region absorbed. Then the sensors updated, not with ships. With geometry. Vectors appeared where none had been moments before, so subtle they barely disturbed the display. Not movement toward the Armada, but alignment with it. Distances resolved, 2.9 million kilometers, 3.4, 4.1, points in space that suddenly mattered. The contacts remained faint, unlit, refusing to bloom into threat icons. Probably debris, an aide said too quickly. The admiral nodded and ordered the advance to continue. There was no reason to slow. Borders without defenses did not demand caution. They demanded conclusion. As the fleet crossed deeper into human space, the emptiness held, vast and unbroken. No alarms sounded, no weapons fired, no voices answered the diplomatic hail that had just been transmitted. The Council interpreted the silence as permission. Behind the calm displays and measured vectors, the Armada moved forward, convinced it was entering a vacuum, and unaware that it had already stepped into a space where absence was the point. The response arrived before the hail finished transmitting. Council channels collapsed into a single priority feed as an external signal asserted access without matching any. Known diplomatic protocol, no banners preceded it, no ceremonial preamble, just audio, narrowband and steady. "You are in restricted space," a human voice said. "Alter course immediately." The command deck stilled. The Reclamation Admiral recovered first, posture unbroken. Authority markers flared as they replied, tone patient and instructional. Jurisdiction was asserted under Council Charter. The region ahead was unclaimed by recognized powers. Transit would continue. The statement ended with a courtesy clause, translated into 8 languages. The human voice did not raise or hurry. "This space is claimed," it said. "Transit is denied. This space is closed." The phrase propagated across auxiliary displays, as analysts flagged it for anomaly. Denial without negotiation was unusual, but not alarming. The Admiral requested clarification, adding context the way one explained gravity to a novice. 10,184 Council hulls present. Passage already underway. No hostile intent registered. "Your numbers are correct," the human replied. "Your assumption is not." The Admiral's expression tightened. Legal framing followed, citing historical access rights and the absence of visible enforcement assets. Silence, the Admiral suggested, was not sovereignty. "We do not advertise our borders," the human said. "We enforce them." A visual link was requested and granted. The image resolved to a dim operations space lit for function rather than ceremony. A single human stood centered, hands behind their back, posture relaxed to the edge of insult. No insignia, no rank markers, eyes steady. "You are obstructing lawful transit," the Admiral said. "You are trespassing," the human replied. "Trespass." The Admiral shifted tone, warning of consequences, of escalation paths the Council preferred to avoid. Time allowances appeared, 300 seconds to alter course, 600 to clear the zone, offered as compromise. The human watched the counters tick for 3 seconds. "Do not proceed," they said. "Any further advance will be treated as hostile action. And, if we continue, then you will cross a line," the human answered. "We will respond." No threat followed, no weapons powered up. The human ship did not appear on sensors with new clarity. The borders remained empty, stubbornly so. The Admiral seized on that emptiness, gesturing to the display. "With what?" they asked. "With what is already here," the human said. "Already here." The channel stayed open. No countdown resumed. The human voice added, almost as an aside, "Surrender protocols will be honored." The phrase landed oddly, premature and misplaced. A few officers exchanged looks. The Admiral laughed once, sharp and dismissive, and terminated. The link. "Continue advance," they ordered. Demonstration posture, weapons crews complied with professional ease. Energy systems charged to instructional output, well below lethal thresholds. The Council would teach the humans the cost of isolation and the meaning of authority. Across the boundary, nothing moved. No fleets revealed themselves. No guns flared. The silence held, complete and unbroken, as if the warning had never been issued. The Armada resumed forward motion, confident that boundaries without force were only words, and unaware that the refusal they had just ignored was the last one they would receive. The first volley was meant to instruct, in not destroy. Council gunnery doctrine set output to 15%, enough to overwhelm any unsophisticated defense while preserving salvage value. 6 forward cruisers aligned emitters and released coherent energy lances across 24,000 kilometers of vacuum. The beams struck empty space first, then something resolved inside it, a mass that had not been there moments before, absorbing the impact head-on. Light bloomed and vanished. No shield flare followed, no harmonic cascade. The energy struck layered, armor, and bled into it, dispersing laterally through structures the Council's models still insisted should not work. Thermal spikes registered, peaked, and flattened in under a second. Radiation backscatter fell below background noise. The contact remained where it was, unmoved. No effect. Weapons officers recalibrated in silence. Absorption efficiency populated. The board, 86%, then 90, then 92.7 as secondary sensors refined the read. The number stabilized and refused to drop. Escalation followed procedure. 12 cruisers fired at 35%. Frequencies staggered to induce resonance failure in primitive materials. Space around the contact became glare, energy saturating every predicted weakness. Armor blackened. External layers sloughed away in controlled ablation, venting charge into the void. Beneath them, identical layers held, intact and aligned. Internal, in telemetry resolved through the glare. Crew life signs steady, no depressurization, no fire. At 50% output, Council emitters began to stress. Containment temperatures spiked beyond nominal. One cruiser dropped power to vent plasma, logging self-inflicted damage, while the target registered none. The contact did not maneuver. It did not return fire. It absorbed. This should have worked. The same phrase appeared in a margin note, flagged as emotional deviation. The Admiral authorized a focused strike at 70% from the flagship's primary array, breaching peacetime safety margins. The beam hit with force sufficient to fracture planetoid crust. The contact's silhouette glowed, then dimmed. Heat vanished into sinks the Council could not resolve. Absorption dipped briefly to 89%, then climbed back above 92 as adaptive layers adjusted. A human transmission cut through the tactical noise, narrowband and unencrypted. Telemetry graphs followed, impact curves, dissipation timelines, clean and annotated. A single line of text was appended. Losses with intolerance. Silence spread across the command deck. Officers spoke over one another, proposing higher outputs, exotic spectra, untested harmonics pulled from research annexes. The Admiral's jaw tightened as they authorized a final demonstration volley at 80% to end the anomaly and reassert control. As emitters charged, sensors flagged motion. Not retreat. Approach. The contact's acceleration curve rose smoothly, 3G then 5, without spike or strain. Distance counters began to tick down, 24,000 kilometers to 21,900. Target is advancing, a technician reported, disbelief leaking into their voice. The Admiral dismissed it as desperation. No unsophisticated vessel could sustain acceleration without killing its crew. The models were clear. The distance closed another 1,000 kilometers. The contact's power curve remained flat. The armor still steamed faintly where energy had struck and failed. The Council prepared to fire again, clinging to the certainty that superiority asserted itself eventually if pressed hard enough. They had not yet understood the problem. The weapons were performing exactly as designed. It was the assumption behind them that had failed. They answered fire with motion. As Council emitters climbed toward 80%, the contact's drive curve changed, not in a spike, but in a smooth, deliberate rise. Acceleration passed 6G, then 9, then settled at a sustained 12. A value Council physiology tables marked as catastrophic. Sensors recalibrated twice before accepting the data. The ship was not surging. It was holding. 12G. At that acceleration, doctrine predicted crew failure, structural shear, loss of attitude. None appeared. Life signs remained steady. Hull stress stayed green. The ship closed from 21,900 kilometers to 17,000 in seconds, nose square, vector exact. It did not jink or weave. It shortened the equation. Then the emptiness broke its promise. Contacts resolved where the charts had sworn there were none. Not fleet assembling, but ships already placed, 20, then 40, then 67. Distributed across millions of kilometers. Each entered acceleration along a different vector, none matching the others. Their timing was offset by fractions of a second, paths threading through Council firing envelopes without overlap. The Armada tried to reform. Elegant arcs tightened into defensive shells. Orders collided. One correction negated another. Fire control. Solutions lagged as targets refused to conform to predicted acceleration peaks. Human ships did not coast. They sustained. They're not running. Distance counters fell across the display. 15,400 kilometers. 12,800. 9,900. At those ranges, energy coherence degraded and reaction windows compressed below safe margins. Gunnery officers asked for time, and were denied by physics. A heavy cruiser broke formation to create space and found a human corvette already occupying the corridor it needed, sliding past at relative velocity high enough to shear sensor vanes. In blind after-rays. No shots were fired. Escorts overcorrected to avoid collision, tearing a hole in the formation that 3 more human ships flowed through without slowing. This was not a charge. It was geometry under pressure. Human acceleration. Profiles rose and fell with intent. One ship cut thrust at 5,100 kilometers, pivoted broadside, then resumed at 12 dri along a new vector, forcing 2 council vessels to choose between collision or separation. They separated. Mutual coverage died with the distance. At 6,200 kilometers, the lead human ship bled velocity in a controlled burn that would have liquefied unconditioned crews. Inertial systems held. It rotated into firing alignment, dark apertures along its spine, irising open. Around it, other human ships settled into positions that bracketed council command hulls without firing a shot. Closing is a weapon. An elder admiral finally recognized the pattern too late. The humans were not collapsing formations with fire. They were collapsing them with timing. Every sustained burn forced reaction. Reaction stacked error upon error. Space grew crowded. Choices vanished. At 3,600 kilometers, Council Command attempted in coordinated withdrawal. The vectors they needed were already occupied. Human ships held those lines calmly, acceleration steady, denying escape without pursuit. The models failed first, then the formations. As the last distances stabilized inside, optimal kinetic range, the human ships stopped accelerating. They did not need to go faster. Authority had already changed hands, measured not in proclamations, but in meters per second squared and the empty space the Council could no longer claim. The numbers settled and the killing began. Human fire control did not paint the battle space indiscriminately. It selected. 3 Council command vessels sat inside 3,600 kilometers, their formations already distorted by forced separation and conflicting vectors. Probability bands narrowed in silence until uncertainty fell below tolerance. Only then did the railguns fire. There was no warning flash, only mass at velocity. 9 tungsten penetrators left the lead human ship's spinal rails at measured intervals, separated by 0.12 seconds to defeat predictive interception. Council sensors registered impact before firing alerts propagated. The first slug punched through a command cruiser's prow, ignored decorative superstructure, and exited through the fleet coordination core. The second followed the same channel, widening it. Pressure collapsed. Power failed in sequence. The ship split along stress lines its designers had never modeled under kinetic intrusion. 1. Missiles followed, launched not in salvos, but in arithmetic. 5 from one vector, 7 from another, each carried distinct guidance logic. Loud decoys burned hot and obvious, saturating point defense tracking. The real warheads coasted cold, waking only in terminal seconds. Interceptors chased what they could see. The rest arrived untouched. A second command vessel attempted emergency thrust, trying to claw distance back towards 6,000 kilometers. The maneuver exposed its ventral plane for 0.9 seconds. 3 railgun rounds arrived through that opening. A fourth followed milliseconds later, delayed to exploit the sudden pressure differential. The gravity ring sheared free and continued spinning, intact and useless, while the hull collapsed inward. Life signs dropped from 9,118 to 0 in under 4 seconds. 2. Council captains shouted for retreat corridors. None existed. Human ships occupied the vectors they needed, holding position with sustained acceleration that denied passage without pursuit. The third command vessel fired blindly. Energy lances splashing across empty space as gunnery solutions lagged behind human motion. A human cruiser answered with a missile carrying a limited-yield nuclear charge. The detonation occurred at calculated standoff, shaped and directional. It did not vaporize the target. It crushed sensor arrays, fractured hull integrity, and collapsed. Internal compartments in a single controlled wave. The command vessel went dark, drifting, structure mostly intact, but systems dead. 3. Human fire paused for 1.5 seconds. Targeting logic re-evaluated. Lesser Council ships were ignored. Screens that no longer coordinated anything were allowed to live. Fire resumed only when a cruiser attempted to reassert authority by broadcasting override codes across the fleet. A railgun round removed the antenna cluster. The cruiser powered down moments later, surrender codes spilling across every channel. We count before we fire. The phrase appeared briefly on a Council auxiliary display, flagged as anomalous doctrine. No one had time to question it. Its way to 100 kilometers, a cluster of Council escorts attempted a desperate mass maneuver, trying to ram a human destroyer to disrupt firing geometry. The destroyer adjusted thrust by 0.4 g, slid aside, and let the escorts collide with one another. Human sensors logged the event as environmental hazard neutralization. No shots were fired. Missiles continued to arrive in measured numbers, not saturation, selection. Each impact removed a ship that mattered. Ammunition counters updated in clean columns. Railgun rounds fired 31, confirmed kills 13, command vessels eliminated 3, 1 disabled for capture. Nuclear charges expended, 1. Human losses remained at 0 destroyed hulls. 3 ships reported superficial armor ablation. Crews remained operational. At 33 minutes, Council command coherence fell below 30%. Fleet-wide orders degraded into local guesses. Some captains fought on until emitters overheated. Others powered down immediately, broadcasting surrender in overlapping frequencies. Human systems acknowledged each signal automatically, marking surrendered hulls green, and excluding them from targeting solutions even when missiles were already inbound, peeling them away mid-course without hesitation. The firing stopped not with a final blow, but with a quiet certainty that nothing left required killing. Human ships held position, weapons cold, geometry intact. The Council Armada drifted in broken clusters, stunned by how quickly superiority had been reduced to arithmetic, and how little emotion had been required to balance the ledger. The guns went silent by decision, not exhaustion. At 33 minutes and 21 seconds, every human weapon system stood down at once. Rail capacitors discharged into sinks, missile bays sealed, fire control solutions cleared across the lattice as if erased by a single hand. Council crews waited for the next calculation and did not receive it. Instead, a transmission unfolded outward from the lead human ship, riding military bands, civilian relays, and open-spectrum repeaters until it spilled far beyond the border and into the wider network. The image was plain. A human officer stood, centered in frame, posture unchanged from first contact. No insignia, no victory markers. "This engagement is paused," the officer said, voice level and precise. "Compliance fire has ceased." Council commanders braced for annihilation terms. None came. "We are broadcasting under interstellar law," the officer continued. "This message is addressed to all Council forces present, to client states, and to any polity monitoring this channel." Data panes unfolded beside the image, definitions, statutes, thresholds, cleanly indexed and time-stamped. First, the practice of chattel slavery is prohibited, effective immediately. Any vessel, facility, or authority engaged in the ownership, transport, or processing of sentient beings will be treated as a criminal enterprise. Across the Council Armada, internal alarms tripped as registries lit red. Cargo holds long normalized appeared on tactical overlays as liabilities. Automated processing queues froze mid-cycle. "Second," the officer said, "surrender is protected. Any ship that powers down offensive systems, transmits standard surrender codes, and holds position will not be fired upon. Boarding actions will be conducted solely to secure weapons and render aid. Prisoners will not be harmed." "We do not kill prisoners." The sentence propagated verbatim across channels. Human fire control enforced it without exception. Green markers multiplied as more Council hulls powered down, some hesitantly, some all at once. Targeting logic excluded them instantly, even when geometry favored easy destruction. "In third," the officer said, "there will be trials." The word carried weight without emphasis. "Command authority does not exempt individuals from accountability. Evidence has been recorded. Jurisdiction will be asserted. Sentences will be imposed by courts, not fleets." A council legal attaché attempted to interrupt, citing sovereignty and ancient accords. The transmission did not pause. "Sovereignty does not extend to enslavement," the officer replied. "Accords that permit it are void." Numbers scrolled beneath the image, stark and unavoidable. Enslaved populations identified, 3.8 million. Vessels flagged for seizure, 294. Command personnel pending detention, 167. Humanitarian transfer window, 72 hours. Human ships began to move again, not toward targets but toward survivors. Boarding craft launched in controlled numbers, medics visible through viewports, weapon safeties engaged. Damage control drones sealed ruptures on powerless hulls to prevent cascading failures. A human frigate altered course by 0.2 degrees to shield a surrendered cruiser from debris drift, surrendering optimal position without comment. The officer concluded without flourish. "You mistook restraint for weakness," they said. "This is restraint." The transmission ended. In the quiet that followed, the council confronted a reality no doctrine had prepared it for. The battle had stopped not because humanity was finished, but because it had decided killing was no longer required, and possessed the force to make that decision absolute. The understanding came from outside the line. Coalition observers had watched the incursion from beyond declared council space, their sensors wide and passive, their analysts trained by long survival beside larger powers, while the council reeled under the law broadcast. The coalition replayed the engagement without the assumptions that had blinded the admirals on scene. They did not ask how the humans had won. They asked why the border had been empty. The data answered without hesitation. Human fleet signatures had not appeared from nowhere. They had resolved from background noise, low-emission hulls parked along dead vectors, acceleration profiles masked until movement made them undeniable. 67 ships had been present before the council crossed the line, distributed across 4.2 million kilometers in a lattice that only became visible once activated. The border was not undefended. It was pre-solved. Quiet was not weakness. Coalition. Tacticians overlaid the vectors and found the deeper pattern. The positions matched choke geometries mapped centuries earlier, long before the council had expanded this far. Human doctrine had anticipated traffic, incursion routes, decision latency. The formations the council lost were not improvised responses. They were the answers to questions humanity had already asked. Logistics data sharpened the point. Human. Then depots existed just beyond sensor resolution. Fuel caches embedded in inert bodies, ammunition stores disguised as survey platforms, maintenance nodes that predated the current council charter by generations. Carbon dating on exposed structures returned numbers that forced recalibration, 213 years. Some older. "They've been ready longer than we've been watching," a coalition analyst said quietly. Physiology reports aligned with the hardware. Sustained 12 Gs acceleration had not been an emergency measure, it was baseline. Human training regimes assumed prolonged stress that coalition militaries treated as catastrophic. Centrifuge conditioning, skeletal reinforcement, cardiovascular, adaptation cycles measured in years, not missions. Human crews had not endured the engagement, they had executed it. Historical overlays deepened the cut. Minor incidents the council had written off as piracy, disappearances at borders, command ships lost without wreckage fields, matched human kinetic signatures too closely to ignore. The quiet around human space had not been accidental. It had been curated. "They don't defend borders," a coalition diplomat concluded. "They enforce crossing, political models updated in real time. Systems that had relied on council protection recalculated their exposure. Worlds that shared human borders and had wondered at the absence of patrols now understood the cost of testing them. Quiet was cheaper than war, and humanity had invested heavily in keeping it that way. The law broadcast took on new weight in that context. It was not a reaction, it was policy, refined and waiting for proof. Trials had been pre-written. Surrender. Protocols standardized. Humanitarian corridors planned along routes the coalition now realized had been charted decades earlier. As the coalition disseminated the analysis through encrypted channels, alignments shifted without announcement. Neutral systems reconsidered treaties signed under fear rather than consent. Trade routes redrew themselves away from council space and closer to the quiet line humanity held. Inside the shattered council fleet, survivors struggled to understand how empty space had defeated them. Outside it, the answer settled with uncomfortable clarity. Human borders were quiet because they had been ready for centuries, and because no one who crossed them twice ever needed to try a third time. Neutralization followed the boundary, not the battle. Human Command reclassified the remaining council vessels into 3 states: hostile, surrendered, undecided, and acted only on the first. The distinction was enforced by systems and people together. Green-marked hulls were removed from firing solutions even when they drifted through optimal arcs. Red-marked ones received no further warnings. Missile bays opened across the human lattice. There was no announcement. Waves launched in disciplined silence, hundreds of signatures blooming and fading as guidance systems shifted between hot burn and cold coast. The missiles did not converge on a single point. They flowed through volume, dividing and recombining, filling corridors of Space Council doctrine had never treated as lethal at once. Point defenses engaged reflexively and failed, methodically. Interceptors chased decoys that burned bright and loud. The real warheads coasted dark, waking only in the final seconds. At 8,200 kilometers, the first hostile cruiser died with engines firing, its hull split by kinetic impact and internal overpressure. At 7,600, another lost power and began to tumble. Surrender codes, spilling seconds too late, to cancel inbound fire already committed by logic gates that did not negotiate. Human systems logged the losses and adjusted nothing. The cascade accelerated. Council captains, cut off from coherent command, made decisions alone. Some powered down immediately, broadcasting surrender across every channel they could reach. Human targeting acknowledged them within milliseconds, their hulls flipping from red to green as missiles peeled away mid-course, retargeting without hesitation. Others hesitated, hoping to survive unnoticed. They did not. Boarding operations followed behind the missile waves as a separate geometry, slower and deliberate. Human cutters approached disabled ships at controlled relative velocities, grapples, locking with mechanical certainty. Breach teams moved in pairs, weapons slung low, medics between them. They sealed bulkheads instead of blasting them. They vented compartments instead of charging through them. Resistance, when it appeared, was isolated, recorded, and denied options until it stopped. Do not fire on green, the directive pulsed continuously across human channels. It was obeyed even when green-marked hulls drifted into perfect firing solutions against still hostile targets. Gunners adjusted, sacrificing efficiency to preserve principle. The choice slowed neutralization by minutes. No one objected. At 24 minutes into the phase, a council carrier attempted a mass launch, dumping strike craft in a desperate effort to overwhelm point defenses. Human response was precise and impersonal. Point defense grids engaged not to annihilate, but to shape. Kill cones herded the fighters into narrow volumes where electromagnetic pulses fired in timed bursts, frying guidance systems and power buses. Hundreds of craft went dead in space, pilots alive, instruments blind. Automated recovery beacons activated without instruction. Surrender, cascade. Coalition monitors flagged the phenomenon as a statistical inflection rather than a tactic. Once a critical mass of council ships powered down and survived intact, the remainder followed faster than any broadcast could compel. At 46 minutes, surrendered hulls outnumbered hostile ones 3-1. At 61, 5-1. The last organized resistance formed around a crippled logistics tender, heavy cruisers attempting to shield it with overlapping fields. Human analysis flagged the maneuver as emotionally driven. Missile fire softened the ring, without saturation. Railgun shots punched precise holes through power cores and thruster assemblies. The tender was disabled without rupture. Boarding teams secured it and immediately began evacuating non-combatants, damage control drones sealing breaches to prevent atmosphere loss. Throughout the phase, the lead human ship held central position, anchoring the geometry. Its railguns fired sparingly now, each shot deliberate, removing vessels that threatened to destabilize the surrender perimeter. Ammunition tallies updated in clean columns. Missiles expended 358, railgun rounds 24 additional, nuclear charges 0 in this phase. Human losses remained unchanged. At 79 minutes, the final hostile marker flipped to green. The battle space did not erupt in cheers or declarations. It simply went quiet. Hundreds of council hulls drifted in ordered clusters, weapons cold, crews waiting. Human ships moved among them like custodians, dispatching repair drones, establishing traffic lanes, preventing collisions that would have killed crews who had already surrendered. Prisoner counts stabilized at 4.1 million Tiger lanes. Injured treated reached 436,000. Fatalities ceased entirely once the last red marker disappeared. An Imperial officer aboard a surrendered cruiser watched a human frigate adjust thrust by 0.3 degrees to avoid debris that might strike their powerless in hull and felt something unfamiliar settle in their chest. Not relief, not fear, recognition. The border was quiet again, not because nothing had happened, but because everything that needed to be enforced had been. Mercy followed enforcement without pause. Human cutters docked with surrendered hulls according to a queue that ignored rank and favored urgency. Atmospheres were stabilized first, then gravity, then medical access. Injured council crew were triaged without comment, species tags flashing briefly before collapsing into a single priority. Schema, analgesics flowed, hemorrhages sealed, fractures braced. The work was fast, practiced, and conspicuously indifferent to uniform or insignia. No reprisals. The directive carried the same authority as a firing order. Marines escorted prisoners with weapons slung low, restraints applied only where resistance had already occurred. Those who complied walked unbound. Those who did not were isolated, recorded, and transferred without spectacle. Every interaction generated data, biometrics, testimony, command lineage, fed into a legal framework already live and waiting. Temporary detention habitats unfolded from cargo holds, modular and sterile. Food met dietary requirements calculated to trace elements. Translators rendered instructions in calm, neutral tones. Prisoner counts stabilized at 4.1 million. Fatalities did not increase. The numbers mattered, and the humans treated them like commitments rather than estimates. Across the border region, civilian traffic resumed under human advisories. Relief convoys arrived along pre-cleared vectors bearing insignia from systems that had never publicly aligned with Earth. Coalition observers watched the manifests populate and recognized the shift immediately. Nearby polities were not waiting for invitations. They were submitting filings, suspension of council tribute, opening of ports to human oversight, requests for arbitration under the statutes broadcast during the engagement. Political gravity shifted, not with speeches or ceremonies, but with timestamps and jurisdictional acknowledgements. The Council's authority bled away through compliance forms faster than it ever had through force. We accept these terms. The phrase appeared in multiple declarations, identical down to punctuation, traced to the law broadcast template. Analysts flagged it as mimetic adoption. Human Command did not comment. Trials were scheduled before the last boarding action completed. Jurisdiction packets listed charges with unemotional clarity. Enslavement, unlawful processing, command responsibility. Evidence hashes linked sensor logs to testimony collected in real time. Command personnel flagged earlier were separated and transferred under guard that neither tightened when they struggled nor softened when they pleaded. The guards had heard both before. A council sector prefect attempted to negotiate amnesty in exchange for immediate realignment. The reply came from a human legal officer, not a commander. Alignment does not erase crimes, they said. The channel closed. Inside the detention habitats, rumors spread faster than fear. Crews compared treatment. They noticed that surrender had worked exactly as promised. They noticed that no one had been spaced. No compartments flooded, no reprisals taken for insults shouted in panic. The lesson settled unevenly, but permanently. At 96 hours, the first liberated populations were transferred off seized vessels. Families emerged into gravity they had not chosen, blinking under lights calibrated for comfort rather than efficiency. Human medics stepped aside as civilian agencies took over, their role complete. The lead human ship remained on station, scarred, armor patched with clean plates that did not hide the damage. Its commander filed a final operational note. Force applied, boundary enforced, mercy sustained. In nearby systems, leaders weighed the cost of crossing against the evidence flowing through every relay. The calculation was no longer abstract. Human. Space did not expand that day. But the meaning of crossing into it changed everywhere. The quiet returned with intention. Debris fields were catalogued and nudged into decay orbits. Traffic corridors reopened under human advisories. Trial schedules propagated through secure channels with the same priority once reserved for firing solutions. From a distance, the border looked empty again, as if nothing had happened and nothing needed guarding. Human sensors did not stand down. Deep-range arrays continued to sweep beyond the outer markers. Baselines stretched across millions of kilometers, listening for patterns that did not belong. At 119 hours post-engagement, one array returned a contact that refused clean classification. The signature was faint, persistent, and wrong. Not a fleet, not a probe. A distortion that suggested mass in motion without conventional drives. Analysts rerun the data. The anomaly held. Its origin lay beyond the outer rim, at a distance exceeding 40,000 AU, approaching along a vector that ignored established corridors and jump geometry. Mass estimates fluctuated wildly, as if the object resisted measurement. Emission profiles matched fragments buried in pre-council archives. Records of systems stripped clean, of civilizations erased so completely their names survived only as cautions. An exterminator signature. Human command convened without alarms or ceremony. Relief operations continued, uninterrupted. Boarding schedules held. The information was compartmentalized and routed to planning cells that predated the Council's expansion into this sector. Contingency headers unlocked. Timelines populated. The numbers were not comforting, but they were familiar. A coalition. Observer, cleared under emergency protocols, asked a single question over a secure channel. Is this a response to the border action? The human reply came after a brief pause. It is adjacent, they said, not causal. Meaning it would have come regardless, meaning the Council had never been the terminal risk. The lead human ship adjusted station by 0.3 degrees, aligning its long-range sensors with the incoming anomaly. Around it, other ships mirrored the motion without instruction, geometry settling into a configuration older than any treaty the Council still cited. Ammunition tallies updated. Training rotations shifted. Messages went out to systems that had not yet chosen a side, carrying no threats, only data. Beyond human space, something ancient continued inward, indifferent to borders, law, or surrender. Humanity watched it approach with the same calm it had shown an armada, and began doing the math again.